station of the Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo.
Don't underestimate
Of a single it could change your whole life.
INCRadio Chatline.
conversations that matter.
This is what I ask. Let me always dwell in the temple of the Lord till I'm
Hello, episode of INC Radio Chatline, where we have conversations that matter. I am your host for today, Elsam John Chris, live here from Rockford, Illinois. And it's not just me today. Joining me in our conversation is one. Actually, I don't know who to. I know who to go for. Who to call first, but I'll just go by distance now. So I'll call on my friend from Michigan first to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Tony Rose here in not Novi. I'm in where am I? I'm in Farmington Hills, Michigan. I'm not used to saying the city here, but I'm in Farmington Hills today. You may hear occasionally some birds chirping because I am outside. This is real. This is all real behind me. So yeah, glad to be here today. Woo! Not the farthest though. I'm not the farthest.
Mm.
I don't-
Yeah,
the
so
panel.
no, we'll count the one who's like the farthest, at least no, by distance, okay, the farthest from us by distance. I'm gonna let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Arnie. I'm actually here in Fort Worth, Texas. I wanted to be outside just like Tony, but the weather here is not great, and I would be burning and sweating if I stayed outside. So I'm stuck in my classroom for today.
No, I know, I'm with you on me. It's our temperature here as well has been in the high 80s for the past week, so it's no, it's pretty warm.
Okay, I'll take high 80s over 90s to 100.
Yeah,
I
I
thought
know.
I thought it was fall already, where it was going to cool off because last week we had really nice low 80s and 70s, and then all of a sudden it went back to 90s. So
Yeah, I was in Texas for like a week, a couple of years back, and yeah, the whole time I was there, the temperature was in the 90s. So I know, I understand that it's really warm there in Texas. But thank you for joining me here today as well. And to everyone there in our team live chat, feel free to share your thoughts as well in our conversation, which is today. I'm pretty sure you can see it on the title. It's about moving on. So, just to my co-panelists here and they're in team live chat as well, if you want to share, like, how would you define moving on? Like when you say moving on, like what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that? When someone tells you to move on or something.
I
So
think
uncomfortable.
no, for me, moving on is more of, what's in the past is in the past, whether it was good or whether it was bad. And now you're moving on to the future or looking, from the present to the future and forgetting about what's behind you.
Mm.
Thanks for that, Arnie. So I don't have to answer.
No, like I want to get your thoughts on that as well, because she said moving on is about forgetting, like one of the things she said is forgetting what's behind you. So do you share that sentiment that moving on is like forgetting?
I feel like throughout the broadcast, I'm going to be changing moving on to moving forward
Mm.
just because it depends on what it is. I feel like there's some things that you can forget about and let go, but there are other things that maybe it's like a spectrum. Just like there's like a spectrum of things where it's like this stuff, yeah, I can let it go, but the other stuff is like maybe because you miss it, because you just miss, like if it's a person, you just miss, so it's stuff like that. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where we are, where we go up in the discussion today. So
And also, yeah, like when you said moving on about the whole, sometimes you won't forget everything because sometimes you do have to learn from it. And so that also helps. But it's just being okay with where you are now and where you're going and not dwelling all the time, well, you know, why can't this happen or why can't they like me? It's just let things go and moving forward.
Acceptance, right? I think that's the word that was kind of coming to mind when you said that, Arnie. Thanks for that reminder. Yeah, acceptance. Not forgetting, but you accept the reality or what the situation is, right, EJ?
Yes. So actually, just since you both brought it up, I just want to ask. I want to ask you guys now, like, what, like, to you, what counts as like moving on then? Like how? Oh, that. Wait, are you raising your hand or is it like I'm thinking? Oh, okay, okay. I thought she was raising her hand. Like you don't have to. You can no, no. You can just unmute.
No, 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 no. I have my hand on my armrest and it just
Oh,
happens to be
okay.
there. So what was your question again?
I was asking you guys, like, for you, what counts as moving on?
So, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about moving on from relationships? Are you talking about moving on from life changes? So it all depends. So let's say we're talking about relationships, how you know you've moved on. Sometimes there comes a point where when a relationship first ends, you're always still thinking about them, thinking what they're doing, maybe still following them on social media and keeping tabs on them. And so for me, I think to show that you've moved on is when one, you're not following them as much as you should. But even if you are, you're okay with it and you're not dwelling on why doesn't that person not like me anymore, things like that. Because you have to come to a point where because you're going to see people, whether they're from your past or whatever, you're always going to have some kind of connection to them, but being okay with it, and probably I think like no longer hurting or no longer caring so much what they do and who they do things with.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I can say I could relate to the social media one where, like, at first maybe you're like curious, like, I wonder what they're up to now, right? Or, like I wonder what they're doing now in life. You feel the need to want to keep checking up on them, or like on social media, see what they posted, see who they're with, maybe. But yeah, like as time moves on, you kind of just like you check on them less and less.
And I don't know, like, if you guys were even around before social media came about,
I was.
but
Yes,
back in the days when things didn't go well in a relationship, right? And you didn't have social media, it was so much easier to just not have contact with them or not
Mm.
know unless someone's telling you, hey, do you know this person's doing this, right? And so I think for me at least, it was easier to move on in the past than it is to move on now, because now you have everything. You've got social media, and then if you're friends with other people who are friends with them, sometimes you'll still see it on your feed or you'll still see it in stories. And so it just, I think, makes it harder. In the past, you know you just don't have to be anywhere near them. You won't see them. You don't have to call them. You don't see them. You don't have to email them. You don't have to hear from them. But now, even if you're trying not to do any of those things, things still pop up somehow.
That's when you take a break from social media. Like if you don't want to see, like you're like, oh, I keep seeing them and like my friends' stories. Like I kind of don't want to see. Take a break from social media, then, so you won't have to see them. but, but like, and saying Tony, like, I don't know, like you have something to add to that, or you just find it fun.
no, I was just laughing because it's true, right? I feel like everything gets a little more amplified now, just with the way that technology has evolved. But a lot of it, in terms of how I know that I've moved on, is that I feel more calm when I can think about it, as opposed to being like highly reactive or like really emotional. So it's not that necessarily that it doesn't cross my mind or that it doesn't, come up in my thoughts or anything, but I feel like I'm not as like 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 some form of intense emotion, like as some intense sadness, or it could be frustration, something to that effect. So I feel like that's, for me personally, when I feel like I've I've moved forward and I've been able to accept. And I like what Arnie keeps bringing up, that word of dwelling. I can tell that I'm not dwelling on it as much anymore. It's kind of just like we just ride through and we keep going and we move. Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, it's a very uncomfortable topic, very vulnerable topic.
A
That's
little
why I'm
bit, a little
laughing.
bit. I would say. I think this is the first
It's
time
a
I've
fun
heard
topic.
all three of
It's
us like
fun. It is
do.
fun. It is a fun
Yeah,
topic, but I can feel like the creep of like, oh yeah, this. Yeah,
I think
it's
this is
very
the first time
vulnerable.
we've actually heard the both of you do kind of like a nervous laugh as it goes.
Well, and not only is it a fun topic, I think it's therapeutic because sometimes you
Mm,
just have to talk about it. And if sometimes if your friends or family they're all in happy relationships or everything's going well, sometimes you don't want to burden them and share things, or sometimes you're just a type that doesn't want to share your personal life with others. And so I think, to be able to talk about it and, and realize, oh, look, it's more of a self-reflection and realizing, oh, like you said, I'm not as upset about it. I'm calm now. If I see their face, it's okay. I don't want to like throw oranges at it anymore like I used to, stuff like that. Then that makes you realize, hey, you know what? I'm going to be okay, and it is easy to move on.
mm. So speaking of like what makes it easy to move on, let's go and like I want to ask you is like what have you struggled with in terms of like moving on? Like the things you struggled with, like when you're like let's say you're trying to move on from someone, from like something, like maybe in the past you were able to to you were able to hang out with your friends a lot, but then now you're all busy. You're not you're not able to hang out anymore, or like even with like relationships with a person that you're trying to move on from. Like, what things have you struggled with in terms of moving
Okay, so if it's we're talking about relationships, I think for me, the hardest part was um, thinking to myself, like, was I not good enough,
on?
or did I not do everything I was supposed to do? Because, and you learn from different relationships where you have some relationships where the other person is very needy and they need you there all the time. And if you can't fulfill that need, that's why it doesn't work. Or you have the other spectrum where, they want to hang out, they want to do things, but they don't want to be with you 24/7. But then, you're trying to thinking in the past, oh, somebody else was needy, so he might be needy, things like that. And so I always wonder, like, what could I have done better? Or what did I do wrong for it not to work out? And then when you think like that, then I start to think, well, I'm like, wait, no, you know what? I did everything I was supposed to do. If it didn't work out because maybe it just wasn't supposed to be, or maybe that person wasn't the one for me, and start to realize that it's not always me, that it could have been, them. Maybe they were another point in their life, or maybe they were looking for something else. So I think it just all depends on the type of relationship and how things ended.
Mm, that got me thinking. Really, the like things that I have struggled with, like in terms of like moving. But how about you, Tommy? Like, what are things that you struggle with
Uh, gosh, a lot of it is either between loss or just opportunities. Um, some opportunities find their way back to me, but not all the time. So moving on from something that you thought was going to be, like, oh, this is going to be the thing. Like, this is going to be the thing that. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear stuff happening in the background. Yeah. In terms of, you know, you kind of imagine how something's going to be,
it?
right? When you have these opportunities that come up, and then when it doesn't go through, right? You kind of go through this process of almost like close to grieving in ways like you kind of grieve the things that were almost, and I think that's true for in my experience. Of course, I'm not generalizing everyone else's, but you grieve these different things. Um, Same thing is true for loss, right? It could be, people that have passed away, or even people that are just are unfortunately not part of your life anymore. And it's not even necessarily because of you know like bad things that happen. You just kind of drifted apart, right? Like I had a lot of friends growing up where I thought that they would be there like forever, right? Just because you have this like great connection with them, but then things happen and you just don't get to talk to them like ever. And then it's like, oh, and so being able to to cope up with those changes, I think that's what it is, being able to adjust and get yourself to kind of recalibrate and trying to navigate that new life that you are moving through. Like a recent one is like a recent loss that we had. It's not super recent, but it's like 2 years ago, and it's something that happened out of nowhere, very very sudden, very quick. And sometimes when it's that sudden and that unexpected,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to kind of just move on from it, like on a switch. So because again, you're trying to readjust, you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the next thing, how do we cope with this as we're moving forward still. So yeah, couple things that I've struggled. It's a lot of things I feel like that we struggle with, to move on. But it's an art, right? It's not perfect. That's why we call it the art of moving on, because it's trial and error, I guess.
and
Maybe.
and it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's what we have to understand, because I think when people think about moving on, they may think, oh, okay, this happened, I need to move on now, and they don't understand that it is a process. And it's okay, sometimes it will be faster than others, sometimes it will take longer. And and like you were saying, it's not even just about relationships. So let's say you were anticipating a job, and you thought you had it in the bag, and you thought you were going to get it, and then they gave it to somebody else. you know that's something you also have to move on from, especially you're already anticipating and making plans of what you were going to do, and it didn't happen. But learning to be okay with where you are and why things didn't happen, I think that's like one of the first steps, and to be able to move on.
Really getting me to think like because I can relate to like what both of you. I would say like me in particular, I will admit I have a hard time, like I have a hard time moving, like sometimes it takes me years to to move on from one thing, and it like even every once in a while it'll come up like in my mind. I forgot who's mentioned it. I think it was Tony. You mentioned like it still pops up in your mind, like every once in a while. The what if, right? Like if if things were different, then maybe like if I reacted differently, then would I still be friends with so and so, right? Like if I like I would say okay, let me share this. I know this experience, but uh, so there was like I did come across like a part of my life where I felt like I isolated myself from people, like my friends, my family. Of course, I still spend time with my family because we live in the same house. But with my friends, in particular, I like a lot of them are online because we move around a lot. So a lot of my friends are online. I didn't like really respond to a lot of people like back then in that point of like my life, and like I would say that's like a major factor into like me drifting apart from them. So when it came time that like did I did move on from whatever was like really getting me down in that time, and I felt like I wanted to talk to my friends again. Like I felt like we drifted like so far that I didn't even know how to approach them, and like it became another thing where I struggled with like accepting that fact that I probably won't be able to talk to them anymore because it was my own fault too that I didn't keep up with them, and they've moved on. They found like new friend groups. They've started investing their time in like something else. Like they found that new rhythm like in their life, right? That new routine that I'm not a part of anymore, and that was something that I had to learn to accept. But it was, I would say, it was difficult to go through like that process. But I think what helped me was knowing that you know, and it sounds counterintuitive, but for me it was like knowing that I had a part to play in that as well. So it didn't get me to like to blame them on like on anything because I know what my part is and like what happened. Yeah. And what I say what happened like it's like there was like drama. There was no drama. That's the thing about it. There was no drama. It was just simply drifting apart, from my friends. But yeah, like for me, it was that was something. Actually, not something. Those were two things I struggled to move on, like from in the past. And just quickly, I just want to know, like for you guys, since you already shared like yours, like was there anything in particular that stood out to you that you would say is what made it difficult to move on from it? Is there like anything that like made that particular thing that you mentioned earlier difficult to move on from?
I don't know. Like for me, because I think I've lived such a longer life, um, you've learned acceptance. And so I think when you're younger, everything seems to matter. Like, oh, if I'm not friends with them anymore, it's going to ruin my life. It's like everything is so dramatic when you're younger because you think that everybody's supposed to stay in your life your whole life. And as you get older, I think you start to realize that it's okay if all your friends don't stick around, as long as you still have your close friends that you could always rely on. And I think when you start to learn to accept that things happen for a reason and be okay with it, then I think it makes it a little bit easier. And then that way you don't dwell on it too much.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on this, EJ? What's made it hard for you?
Like what made it difficult for me to move on? It's like I kept revisiting the past. I think that's what made it difficult. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but like it's continuously thinking about like the time I spent with my friends, the time where it seemed like we were inseparable, right? And now it's like we're like strangers now. We're like we do see each other from time to time, but we don't like even say hi to each other anymore. You know, like maybe just like acknowledging like not like hey, like it's good to see you. Kind of just like that. Kind of just like that now. Um, but yeah, for me, it's like going like it kept going back to like the past. That's what made it like even more difficult to move because like I would say the first few times it was hard to even just like see them in person because uh like I felt awkward. Like I didn't know how to even approach them, how to say hi to them when like I crossed paths with them. I just kind of like averted my gaze, so I don't have to, like kind of like, oh wait, I didn't see you, right? kind of kind of thing. And that was it for like I would say a few years because it was uh like I just felt awkward to, that I wasn't, I wasn't uh, there with them. I wasn't there with them for like the duration that it took me to move on from like something else, right? So for me, that's what made it different. So, oh,
Well, I was just gonna say, I guess that's also why I keep saying moving forward as opposed to moving on. Because some other um, more subtle things I think that we don't also talk about is like, let's say you're a your son or daughter and you're about to, you know, get married, right? And you kind of, that idea of moving forward, and you move on from the kind of lifestyle that you had when you lived with your parents, right? And you kind of long for that sometimes, where, you know, when you're not with them anymore, you miss that, right? Like being able to, but it's not because anything bad happened, but it's just because you're in a different part of your life now, and you're moving forward, you're moving on from that stage of your life that, you know, not that your parents aren't going to be there for you anymore, but the dynamics that you used to have, where you would wake up and your parents would make breakfast for you, but now you're the one that's making breakfast, and you know they're the ones that, you know, helped clean your help clean your room, but now you have to clean the whole house by yourself, you know, stuff like that, where we just get used to different things in our life, right? We get comfortable with these different things, and um, you know, we kind of reach these checkpoints where we don't realize that there's going to be that shift, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess this is what's happening now. I guess this is what's, you know, and that moves across like all these different things that we talk about, because sometimes these things are through choice, right? You know, whether it's a decision to move, you know, to a new country, or a different state that's far from your family. Like if, once you're a full, you know, adult and you have your own job, and it could be, you know, like what we talked about earlier with relationships, sometimes that could be by choice or not by choice. Like you might be the party that wants to stay in the relationship versus the other who doesn't want to stay in the relationship anymore. Like there's so many different, I think, facets of moving on that we don't even realize happen in the day to day, just because when we've been accustomed to something and we're just used to that. I feel like that's where the friction kind of happens, where it's like, but I like this. I like how it is. But sometimes, you know, like what we say as Christians, like God always has a plan. God always has some kind of direction for us, and the that might not always um, require us to stay in that situation, in that, you know, because there are other things that we need to do. So we kind of, you know, move through, and then that's why I keep trying to say move forward as opposed to moving on, because when I think of moving on, it makes me think of like, you know, it feels like it gives it a bad connotation to it a little bit, but like moving forward, it makes me think of like, you know, you're progressing from a point, right? And
And this is why acceptance is really important, and usually that's the first one, because once you've accept what the situation is, then it makes it easier to, like you said, move forward. Okay, but when we keep dwelling on everything that's happened, I mean, it's good to learn from your mistakes and it's good to learn from your past, but when you dwell on it too much, that makes it more difficult to move forward or to move on. And so, we have to learn that, hey, this is what life is like now. There's reasons, the way it is, whether it's good reasons or bad reasons, but we have to accept that, because until we accept it and then we keep dwelling on the past, it's going to be harder to move forward or to move on.
and I just don't know. Like, yeah, this is just a thought that like popped in my mind when I was listening to both of you like talking. I think sometimes even if you know that, like, what made me think of this was when you mentioned, Tony, the part of us that goes, I like how things are now, and like when we're content with how things are, we want to keep it that way, and sometimes even if we know that the dynamic will change someday, uh, like there's still a part of us that's like dreading that, I know that from happening, like let's say could be like let me use this example. Like when my brother had to, had to leave home to go to, to go to college, and he went to college like in the Philippines. He went home where it's not like we can just drive this amount of hours to visit him. Like we knew that it's gonna be years before we get to see him again, and just knowing that when it did come, like I think that's when it hit me that my family's dynamic was gonna change, because my older brother is not with us anymore. He's not gonna be with with the four of us. It's not gonna be the five of us anymore. It's gonna be the four of us now, like in the household. And I think the first night, like that realization, like actually hit all of us. That we ended up we just set up like one big it wasn't an air mattress, but like one big I don't know what it is in English, like kumot. It's like a bed cover covering.
Oh, like
We just
the duvet, like
yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like
The
the
debate.
big yeah.
The debate, yeah. We just set it up on the living room floor, and we just kind of all slept there because we were all sad that when that realization hit us that our family dynamics is gonna change. Now we're used to it. My older brother, he has his own family now. We've sort of moved on from that phase of it. But I just want to say when even when it's something is bound to change, in the future, that things are not going to stay that I know that same way that you're content with, that you're happy with. I think a part of you still kind of is afraid of that. I know that from happening. It's gonna come someday, but you're part of you is already struggling to move on from that. I know from that fact. So what I want to ask you guys now is and you kind of touched on this earlier. It's what steps can we take towards moving on or moving forward?
What a lot of Arnie has mentioned in terms of, you know, mindset will really make or break you when it comes to a lot of things in life. And of course, we're just speaking on our experiences here. We're not experts. Um, I only have 28 years of of things to give you. Like that's all I got. Okay, that's all I got. So in the stuff that I've gone through, what's kind of helped me is being able to to try to reframe it as opportunities. Now, that's not always going to be easy to do, especially if the thing that you're moving on from has caused you, you know, some pain or some grief. But in like if I were to give like an example of what I mentioned earlier, you know, it's been 2 years since one of our friends here has passed on. And instead of just focusing on the idea of the loss, it opened up my eyes to see that, you know what, the time that I was investing in my friendship with this person, I can now give to other people that maybe, you know, needs more attention than I realized, or that um, you know, could foster a new relationship in a different dynamic. And it doesn't always have to be thinking of moving on in that negative context will really be able to help you move better, um, and just take actions a little bit better, because then you're in that mindset of, you know, this is an opportunity, this is something that I can seize in that way, like, oh, you know, that might not have worked out, but like redirection, like being able to channel your energies into something that's more, I don't want to just say positive because it's not just positive, but it's because if you're investing all that energy into something that you know is it's already what it is, and you
Mm,
can't do anything about it, you know, at that point anymore. So why not pivot and try to channel your energies into something else that will be fruitful for you? I guess I don't know if that's the right word that I want to use, but Arnie, what are
No,
your
I think I kind of get what you're at now. kind of get what you're what you're trying to say. But I saw Arnie unmute, so I'm gonna let her say her answer first.
So so yeah, it's like we said with acceptance, right? Sometimes when you lose somebody and um it is heartbreaking, but how you set your mind to how you're going to accept it, I think really makes a big difference. So for me, when I have friends who I have lost, who I know I will not see again, I always think of them, well, they're on extended vacation and they're like out of the country. That's why I can't see them. But eventually, when the end comes, then we'll see each other again, kind of a thing. And that was something I had to learn because, you know, especially getting up my age, you know, they tend to not be as healthy as they used to be. And grief is always going to be there, but how you handle that grief so that you can move forward, I think is a really it's a big difference. So I'm not kidding, I have friends who, let's say, they had passed while they were in the Philippines, and so I don't think of them as have passed. I think of them, hey, they're still going to be in the Philippines, they're not coming back to the US, I'm not going to see them for a while, but it's okay because eventually I will, and that's how I see it. And I think that's what helps me move on from that type of pain and that type of hurt.
No, I'm just gonna. I know. I want to add to when I heard like your answer, Tony, about seeing it as an opportunity. It's a good way to look at it. You know, like instead of like I would say from me, I felt like I needed to hear that back then because like I invested like I always the thing that I would say like lesson learned is that I focused too much attention on like what could have been that I wasn't paying attention to the present at all. And then the present becomes the next thing that I struggle to move on from, you know, and it became, a cycle that was it. I'm looking for like a different term other than moving on, but like it became this cycle that was difficult to break out of. Like that was difficult to break out of, uh, and just thought that I wanted to reiterate was that um, uh, that I wanted to reiterate that I heard from the both of you is that like you have to kind of see it like as an opportunity. It's like it's not that you've like let's say when I know when my family moved to a different place, like I could have the way that I've seen it, the way that I dealt with it is that is that like I was so sad that I didn't um, make an attempt to make new friends in our new in our new uh, place in our new locale. I didn't attempt to make new friends because I was still hung up about like the friends I had in our previous one. And then when it's time to move from this account to the next one, like I'm now thinking of like, oh, what if I only spent, if only I spent more time knowing, like, knowing these people, I would have been able to make like more memories with them. I would have had fun. I would have had fun. If I wasn't too hung up about like what could have been, what could have been, and focus on like what it is now. You know,
And I
so
think with the whole moving thing, I think it's just also who you surround yourself with. Because I know people always tend to just want to be people with their ages. Okay, from when I was younger to even now, I've always had friends in different age groups. Like I have the younger ones so that I could still feel like I'm a kid, right? And then of course my nephews because they are kids. And then I have friends who are my age, but I also have friends who are like 15, 20, 30 years older than me. And then that way you get a perspective so that when you're at different points of your life where you feel like you need to move on or move forward, you get a different perspective. Because if you're getting the perspective of your friends where everything was like a big deal and, it's so horrible, then that's not going to help you move forward. But then when you get a perspective of somebody's older who has been around, and they'll try to let you know where, it's not that bad. And eventually you're going to see it. You're not going to see it now, but it is going to be better. And that's a knowledge I like to share with the younger ones. So, I have friends who do move every 2 to 3 years. And I know they're sad because they don't want to leave. They don't want to leave their friends. And I tell them, you know what? It's going to be an adventure because all the friends you made here, now you're going to go there. You're going to make new friends and you're going to live somewhere different where, they probably have better food or, different things. And I show them the positive of it and let them know, hey, this is going to be a great thing. And then once you're all settled in, we can come visit you. Then I think that helps. But sometimes we hear our parents like, oh, we're moving again. Oh, we're so sad. Then that's what gets into the mindset of the kids. But then if you show them, hey, they got better parks there, or they have better things that you can do there, and show them the positives, then I think that helps them with moving on from what they're leaving behind.
I like the perspective you shared there in the beginning. I think for me, I'm starting to see that pattern now of like like when you're in middle school, it feels like middle school is everything, right? Like middle school drama is that serious, right? But when you get to high school, like high school drama is that serious. Like everything that happens, when I'm in high school is gonna be very important in my adult life. It's not, like when you look back on it now, you're like, it wasn't that serious. It wasn't that serious. I don't know why I was that upset about it. Like I'm trying to look at like my life now as like like in the future. I'll look back at this point in my life and like say to myself, why were you that stressed about it?
See, exactly. And like you said, you learn from your past, right? So when you learn that, because I did the same thing, in high school. Life was all about high school, and now you realize, no, it was just high school. But then now it's
It
our
was a part.
responsibility to share that with the younger people. So, like, I don't have any kids, but a lot of my friends' kids will come to me and ask me for advice because they don't want to talk to their parents. And that's a thing I show them. I'm like, hey, you know, don't stress. It's not always going to be like that. And serious, high school's really not that serious, you know, but that's our responsibility now that we've gone through it to help them see that, because then at least they have someone who could kind of guide them along the way.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Arnie, because I think what happens to, I guess maybe it's because like their capacity to see in that moment is like that they just have all that feeling. But that's why perspective is so important, because when you're able to kind of get that perspective from somebody else, especially from someone who's been through it already, you're kind of like, you get that reassurance that like, okay, I'm gonna be able to make it out of this. And sometimes we need that, from someone else, and it's helpful to get that from people that we trust and that we're close to. So, yeah. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, if I could just say, I should have listened to my mom when she says that, you're gonna get through this. Maybe at the time, like just speaking of like perspective, maybe at the time you're thinking, how, right? When someone tells you that you're gonna be able to move on or
Say
move
that
forward,
again. What was the
that's
first line you said?
like I wish I should have listened to my mom like when
See?
she said that. When she told me that I would be able to move forward, that it's not the end of the world, like you're gonna be able to move on from this. Like I would say the first thought I had was like, how, like I feel like I'm the first person to ever go through something like this. It's so like I don't know if let me stop me if you've heard this thought if you've had this thought before. Like this is probably the worst anyone has ever felt in the history of mankind. Like
Exactly.
like if you had that like thought like before that nobody has ever experienced this kind of like pain that I'm experiencing right now. Like that's how it feels. That's how it feels at the moment, right? Like even when someone tells you Like even when they share their experiences of the time that they went through something like that, like in your mind you're thinking, no, this one's different, this is worse than that. But like, Nick, I understand why at the time it's hard to think of that, because like your perspective is there. It's like it's in this thing. You're zoomed in on the situation that you're not seeing like other perspectives of it, like maybe from your parents, from your friends, right? Like I would say like something that like really helped me was like a friend bringing up the perspective that I've seen you go through worse. I've seen you dealt with worse things before, so I don't know why you're still worried about going through this, because I've seen you deal with worse things. And I, I feel like that really reeled me back in to like get me to see like the bigger picture. Like, you know what, they have a point. Like I did went through, maybe not worse in my perspective, but like I went through something like this before, something that was like for me uh this intense like before, and I did overcome it. I did get through it. So like it's what helped me from like moving on, realizing that what, they have a point. They have a point. Like there is, like a way. There is a way. It's not the end of the world. Like this thing is not the end of the world for me. It's not that I'm gonna be miserable for the rest of my life because of this one thing. There's gonna
And
be good things coming.
and that's I think that's one of the key points, right, is learning from your mistakes and learning from other people. Because they have a saying where smart people, they learn from their mistakes, but wise people learn from other people's mistakes, so that way they don't have to make it. And then I think that's important because a lot of kids nowadays, exactly, you don't know what I'm going through, but people who have more years have gone through things. It may not be the same exact thing, but the concept is pretty much the same. And I think that's what the youth needs to understand. They're not the first ones to go through these problems because guess what? Everybody else has. And when you actually listen to other people and try to learn from that, it'll make life so much easier.
Mhm. I wish I was like that. I wish I could learn just by listening to like like I would say it's not. I'm not putting myself down, but what I would say from experience, I have learned, like for me, the most important lessons I learned the hard way. The hard way. Like I did have to learn it the hard way, but like if like it would be nice if you can, right? If you're able to keep that mindset, which I'm also trying to train myself to do, like the mindset of like listen to people, listen to people when they talk, like listen to them when they share their experience on something, right? Like don't just think of like that thought of like this is the worst that anyone has ever felt. Like I don't know, like this, like nobody can understand this, like this, people can, like that's the thing with like situations or those moments that we have, like there has been someone who's gone through that. There has been someone who's had that same feeling like before. Maybe the situation is different, but the feeling was the same, you know so listen to them, and just lastly, I just realized what time it is. But just lastly, just before we close off, like I do wanna ask like the both of you, just in terms of like on the why, why we should move on. Like, is there anything that, let's say, someone is struggling to move on? Is there anything you wanna share with them? Maybe like, like why we should move on. What do we gain? What do we gain? If we're able to move on.
I think with you know not forgetting the past, but not looking back anymore and looking forward. If you struggle, if you don't want to move on, if you're so stuck in your ways, you're going to miss out on a lot of different opportunities. Okay, if you don't want to move on from a past relationship, maybe there's a relationship for you in the future that's better than what you're even expecting. just like if your friendships, you feel like you're so torn because you've lost certain friends. You may make better friends. There are better things out there. And with that concept of things happen for a reason, being able to look forward and say, hey, life might not be great today, but tomorrow has to be better. Because, first of all, it can't get any worse than what it is now, right? So it can only get better. And so if you don't move forward and you don't move on, you may be missing out on great opportunities that's just going to make your life so much better.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Um, the more that I think about it, and just because when you look back and you reflect on different things that like you might have gone through, um, as Christians, right? We always believe that God has a plan for us, and there's things that we need to go through in order to become the best version of ourselves. And resisting, it's nice to go through the good, right? But when the bad comes, of course that it doesn't feel comfortable, and it makes us feel sad, or it makes us feel painful. But we also need to go through that too, because those things teach us as well. Like we can't just be taught by um, you know good things or success. We also need to be taught by failure and painful things too, because how will you know how to cope with those if you don't go through it? But being able to move forward through those things, like I like what Arnie said, is that if you get stuck in that moment of whatever it is that you are that's that you can't move on from, then you're kind of putting a period on your potential, or you're putting a period like, okay, it just ends there. But it doesn't have to end there. And in terms of like moving on, you don't know what the story is going to look like farther down the line. So there could be things that come back into your life, and it might be packaged differently. It could be a completely different situation down the line. So it's kind of important to be open, like what Kathleen said in there in the live chat, being open to possibilities of how things can go, and not um I like the word attachment. Like being super super attached to things can be really hard, because that's what makes it hard to let go. So being open to what God's plan is, to how things will, where you will move, where you will, go through the process. That's the only way that we'll keep growing. And we always have to keep growing, because if we stop growing and we stop improving, we just become stagnant. And it's like, well, then what? Right? Like then what? You wouldn't have reached the potential that maybe God had for you, had you not, you know, like let yourself, you're just like, you know what, let's just go through this. Let's just go. Again, not dismissing your emotions, right? Not not to say that you're just going to deny or like forget all those things. You acknowledge it, you feel it, but you don't let that dictate what your next moves are going to be. You don't
Focus on the action.
Yeah, you focus on the action, and don't use those emotions as a reason for you not to move, to not do things, to not keep going, to not take opportunities. It'll be a lot harder to be stuck. It's like you're kind of stuck in time. Like time is passing, but you're still just kind of like, you're just there, right? So that's always the end goal, is for us to continue to level up, and to continue to improve. And we can't do that if we can't move forward through these tough things, as tough as they may be, as painful as they may be. Going back to that word of acceptance, right? Like, accept it with a whole heart, with a open mind, right? Like, again, thinking in possibilities. Reframe. It's in the reframe where you kind of like, we'll see.
Yeah. And that's not something that just is going to come right away. That takes
Yes.
practice. And I think the more you experience things in life, the more you'll start to understand that. And so, like I said, and that's why I always made it a point to have friends from different age range, so that I can get different perspectives and not always just see from what my friends see that are my age, because we're probably seeing the same thing.
I want to thank both of you for sharing that. Sharing those things, those advice that you Kev. Like, and I just want to reiterate, like, you both mentioned about like moving on, or moving forward. It's like not letting it, not letting what has happened, not letting your past stop you from the potential of of your future, right? Like what I think Arnie, you were the one who mentioned it, that uh, you might be so focused on this past that you're, like this past, this relationship, that not you're not seeing you're not seeing the opportunity now, right? That could happen. So I hope that everyone there, in Team Live Chat, uh, you've had, the opportunity to share your thoughts. You've maybe learned something new, or and hopefully this has been a conversation that mattered to you as well. And I again want to thank my co-panelists here for joining me in today's conversation, and as well for sharing your thoughts. To again, to our listeners, our viewers there, thank you for tuning in with us. And please, if you have the time to, leave a comment there and let us know. Let us know. What is a conversation that matters to you. And until next time, we'll see you again here on INCRadio Chatline. Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
This is what I ask. Let me always dwell in the temple.